The idea of setbacks in advance, that the whole cycle shows that, as we've said before, you and I are in a life of conflict. And there's no averting that conflict, but it's going to be, depending on your response to it, you'll become bitter or better. So it's your call. It's not what you have that you receive or what talents you've got, but what do you do with what you've been given? And facing a time, an opportunity like now, it's not for us to determine the times we have, but it's for us to determine what we are to do with the time we've been given. And that's really our counsel that I think is great for us all. Even though it's God's will for you to grow strong in faith and to labor and to advance in His kingdom, He doesn't want to remove the opposition. Here's why. If you respond properly, the opposition will drive you to greater dependence on the Lord and to greater determination to do what He's called you to do. That's very important. The first defense against the enemy is to be aware of the kinds of opposition that he uses. And so we were describing that in chapter 4, and I would recommend that chapter as a thing to go back to contextualize this, because we covered a lot of different areas that I think all of us wrestle with. But in chapter 5, I'm going to just read the text to you here. So, and speaking of reading the text, I'm continuing to use my app, my phone. Any of you, Chuck is now doing this. He's a good boy, you see. Most of you aren't doing this, but I'm hoping that this. What's the harm in trying it for a week? Try it for a week instead of listening to other books on tape or audio books. Try it for a week and see. And now I've just encouraged my friend to do it when he's shaving and other times. You see, not just when you're driving. That's what's the key, because it's astonishing how much time you have to do little trivial tasks. So I carry this with me all the time. So the result is that I finished just today. I finished the second time through, and I was with the ESV. I started on Thanksgiving, so it was 2 months and 3 days, I think. And so I'm now starting the Christian Standard Version. And it's a different sound, different everything to it.
For I have seen that you alone are righteous before.
I'm in Genesis 7. So I'm just saying that this is something astonishing to do. But what it's doing for me, and this is why I'm so eager to get you to try it, is you get the big perspective in such a compressed way, and it's an astonishment. Your perspective on Scripture gets amplified. And then each time I go through it, it's going to be a different translation, different voice. And so you're hearing it from different angles, different really a stereoscopy, and it gives you depth of field. So this time through, already I'm seeing things I didn't see before, just today. So it's a journey with you, and I really would encourage you to consider this being the beginning of the year. Pick a good translation. The first one I used, and I usually teach from, is the New American Standard 1995 version. I then did the ESV, so now I'm doing the Christian Standard edition here. But that's the point is, let it be infused in you. And you're going to find it's going to give you depth of perspective, and the Spirit speaks through the Word. And He who inspired the Word, the Spirit of God, makes His dwelling in the believer, because the infinite Word became the incarnate Word, so He would become the indwelling Word, so that He is in you and you are in Him. The very Spirit who inspired the words of Scripture is now in you, and He works in you, and He actually illuminates the text, and He'll convict you through it, and He'll comfort you, and He'll use all kinds of ways in which you can get that. And seeing being washed by the water of the Word is a very powerful effect. So I would very strongly encourage you to do it. Another time when I'm listening to the Bible is when I'm paying bills and doing stupid things like that require no mental exercise, you see. So why not at least redeem that time? And it's amazing how quickly and how much you can get through it. So I'm going to try it this time to see, even though they are a stiff-necked and rebellious people. Nevertheless, I will continue to try. So we are up to Nehemiah Chapter 5. That's my little sermonette for the day for you, to get you to do that. Now, there's a sudden stop in the work that takes place with Nehemiah, where all of a sudden the labor, which has been successful, they're making another advance. It was pushback, there was opposition, and then there was advance. But now there's another pushback. But this time they stop. Nehemiah actually, I think, stops the work because there's a crucial issue that's not being addressed. There was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, "We, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore, let us get grain that we may eat and live." There were others who said, "We're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses that we might get grain because of the famine." Also, there were those who said, "We've borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children is like their children. Yet behold, we're forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters are forced into bondage already. And we are helpless because our fields and vineyards belong to others." This is an oppression. This is a system. And so he needs to deal with this now. So he literally is, as I see it, some people think this is just something later on. I think this is right in the middle of it. This is an issue that needs to be resolved because they're going to lose heart. And the workers then need to have a sense of being cared for, that they're doing the God's business and God's going to watch after them as well. So Nehemiah, a great leader. And this is one of the great books for learning leadership principles, as you can well imagine. It's a fabulous book for leadership. And I've written 2 books on leadership because I was involved in that because of the Leadership Bible. Then I created that material, turned that into a handbook to leadership with my 2 associates. And then from that, having taught that, I did leadership in the image of God. And I find these principles always start with a character. So I always start with the character of the leader, then their skills, and then their relationships. So that's that inside-out process here. Nehemiah was the governor now, had been so for about maybe 14 years. And so he was the governor. He was given this opportunity because of his work in Persia. So he was allowed to be able to actually deal with these matters, and rebuilding the walls was such a huge thing. He says, "I was very angry when I heard their outcry in these words. I consulted with myself and contended with the nobles and the rulers and said to them, 'You're exacting usury, each from his brother.' Therefore I held a great assembly against them." This is a very bold confrontation. I want to pull out some principles that I think are well worth our noticing, this man from a leadership standpoint. But just to give you the text so it flows here, because you need to hear the narrative. "We, according to our ability, have redeemed our Jewish brothers who were sold to the nations. Now would you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us?" Then they were silent and could not find a word to say. And again I said, "The thing which you're doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? And likewise I, my brothers and my servants, are lending them money and grain. Please let us leave off this usury." Remember, they were not allowed to exact interest from their countrymen, from their brothers. They could lend them money, but they're not to charge interest. It was part of the Mosaic law. So in this context, then give them, he said, restore them. Please give back to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money of the grain, the new wine and the oil that you're exacting from them. The 100th part of the money in the grain was 10%, 1% a month. It was 12% a year is what it worked out to be. And then they said, "We will give it back." And this is the amazing thing. Rarely will you hear people who are rebuked and getting profit from this repent. But he made it so public, so clear, that there was a force, there was an authority, and he'd cultivated an authority because of the effectiveness of the work that he'd achieved already. And so he says, "We will give it back and will require nothing from them. We will do exactly as you say." So I called the priests and took an oath from them that they would do according to this promise, holding them accountable to that, as we'll see. I also shook out the front of my garment and said, "Thus may God shake out every man from his house and from his possessions who does not fulfill this promise, and thus may he be shaken out and emptied." And all the assembly said, "Amen." They praised the Lord. Then the people did according to this promise. Now, Nehemiah sets an example as well in his leadership. "Moreover, from the day that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, for 12 years. Neither I nor my kinsmen have eaten the governor's food allowance. But the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from them bread and wine and besides 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants domineered the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. So I also applied myself to the work on this wall. We did not buy any land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Had he bought land, by the way, he knew it would have gone up in value once the wall was built. But that's not for him to be entangled in that. Moreover, there were many at my table, 150 Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now that which was prepared for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also birds were prepared for me, and once in 10 days all sorts of wine were furnished in abundance. Yet for all this, I did not demand the governor's food allowance because the servitude was heavy on his people. Apparently, he took that upon himself. Remember me, he cries to God. Remember me, O my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. So you get the gist of the text. I just read the chapter 2. It's a short chapter. And I want to just walk you through just certain principles that I think emerge from that I think can be very helpful. And there's some material that's found in the Bible.org. And I've got a lot of articles on Bible.org. And I found this one source that'd be very, very helpful on Nehemiah. I'm borrowing some of his concepts here. There'll always be those who bring in destructive heresies in the church. There's always going to be heresies from without, but there's going to be problems from within. You're going to have both kinds of things. And chapters 4 and 6 shows how he had to deal with opposition from without. But this chapter deals with opposition from within. So there's an internal problem. And when you have an internal problem in a church, then heresies from without, but evil behavior and so forth. And Titus and Timothy and the others were exhorted to make sure that this is dealt with, because it would always be people who will bring in these kinds of things. And so it's needful for us to confront serious error and behavior and do it quickly and in unity. So, because we're called to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace, Ephesians 4:3. And we should, according to Romans 14:19, pursue the things that make for peace and the building up with one another. And if we want God's blessings, Peter says that we must seek peace and pursue it, 1 Peter 3:11. So you can't be passive. It's a matter of not compromising with these things. And so I wanted just to pull out a few principles from this material. Jesus teaches us about how all things need to be done under the authority of the Father, and they're exemplars. And he's thinking, Jesus knew the scriptures well. And you can just think about how his mind, when he returns to his favorite books, what were they, by the way, based upon the number of times he quoted them? Deuteronomy was one of them. Yeah, and Psalms were the other. But those, he was seeped in the text of Scripture. And that's what I desire for you, because the more it's there, it becomes intuitive. You begin to sense, and you're giving the Spirit of God more and more material to work with in your interior life. But at any rate, he sees these as matters that need to be resolved quickly. And there are some principles for resolving conflicts in the church. And 3 principles here, which involve the people, and one that involves, 2 involve the people, 1 involves the leaders. Number 1, to resolve conflicts biblically, people must air compliments to the proper authorities. They must air them to the proper authorities. And so the Matthew 18:15 principle is pretty critical. And if we go to Matthew 18 for just a moment here. If your brother sins, this is a critical text that's largely overlooked in practice in the church. These 4 steps. If your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. If he does not listen to you, take 2 or more with you, so that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be confirmed. 2nd step. 3rd step, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. 4th step, if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. In other words, he's to be excommunicated from that body until he repents. And in fact, the excommunication was to bring them to repentance, which was, we see an example of that in the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. But he says, first step is if your brother sins, what are you to do? Tell other people. You see, this is what happens typically. You'll find that people will, because they don't want to have the courage to confront another person, it's much easier to tell them as a concern, as a prayer request. You can shape it up however you want, but it just sounds, I'm just concerned about my friend. And so when you begin to tell that, it creates seeds of gossip and dissension, doesn't it? In fact, anytime somebody tells you about another person in a negative light, you need to ask them the following question. You know the question's going to be, did you tell them yet? 99 times out of 100, they haven't. What's your next question? Answer the question to be, then why are you telling me? You see, you have no right to tell me until you've confronted that person. There's a lack of courage often when we don't do that, so we just hold it back. But then it becomes as prayer requests and concerns in the church and so forth. Seeds of doubt and dissension take place, and it's not right. So in my view, this first one is the most commonly violated of them all, that people must air complaints to do it in the right way. If you can't deal with problems, and a leader cannot deal with problems he's not aware of. And it sounds painfully obvious, but think about this. I'm amazed at how often people air their complaints to everyone except the leaders who could perhaps do something to help. You see, so they're talking about this, that, and the other, but if they would come to us or to the right person, you would at least have a knowledge of this. So that's the issue. I think people don't have the courage to confront. It's not my natural, I'm not a confronter. Some people get great pleasure out of confrontation. That might be a problem. But my problem is I'm aware of the fact that I'm not very good at confronting. But I have to say, I have no right to tell another person, a third party, until I've confronted that first person. Then, as we say, the next step would then be to bring 2 or 3 witnesses if they don't respond. And then it depends on the situation, how urgent or how problematic. And the Spirit will guide you. Because we all stumble in many ways, but there are going to be some things that are going to be causing seeds of dissension and have to be dealt with pretty quickly. So they complain about this, and they stir up dissension and disunity, and it would really be a very good thing to find out what it is and to do this. This author wrote, years ago, the wife of one of my elders called and asked, did you know that Miss Jones, an elderly woman in the church, is calling through the church directory asking people if they like our using guitars in our worship times? I said, no, I had no idea. So I went to visit Miss Jones. Her first words, so you've come to bawl me out? I said, no, I've come to talk with you and to explain why we have changed our music style. And I've come to ask you not to stir up gossip and controversy by calling through our church directory. Clearly, she was very uncomfortable with such direct resolution of a problem. But he nailed it, you see, because she's to confront her directly, because it's causing gossip and it's causing controversy, and it's not correct. It's not the way things should be done. True in the church, true in any organization in operation. So there are biblical principles I think need to be honored. So you first approach, then if they don't respond, then it would be 2 or 3 by the mouth of 2 or more. And then, if not, then to the church. And if they don't respond, then and church discipline, those 4 stages. Any questions on those 4 stages? Because it's very important to see that. Yes, John.
Winston Churchill may not have been a Bible scholar, but Churchill said, gossip twice told
is what?
Slander, which means that it gets worse and worse.
Yes.
He said, gossip twice told is slander.
Yeah. Pete Bodie just gave me this copy of The Wit and Wisdom of Winston Churchill. I'm greatly enjoying this. The guy was just, he was able to come, you and I, when you hear a thing, then you think of a witty response, but it was 1 minute or 5 minutes too late. He had it right on his fingertips, and that makes a huge difference.
Can I see that?
Yeah, Chucky. This topic's not interesting enough for you to say.
No, I want to make a note of it.
I'm giving you a hard time. So if someone comes to you with a complaint, then ask if they've talked with that person. To resolve, a second principle is to resolve conflicts biblically, leaders must deal with complaints in a biblical manner. And so in this instance, Nehemiah exemplifies this because he could have said, I'm busy on this wall, come back in 6 weeks and we'll talk. But he chose not to because he realized this was so significant that the people were so upset, it would affect their attitude and the quality of their work as well. So he interrupted his attention on the wall and to listen and resolved. And he did 5 things that leaders should do, as this writer puts it, and I think he's right on the money. Number 1, he got righteously angry. He was angry. And it might surprise someone to see that he got angry when you hear this. There seem to be 2 extremes. Some think that all anger is wrong, or sometimes they go the opposite extreme. They deny it and say it just is. The Bible clearly teaches that most anger is sinful, but that some anger can be righteous. Jesus got angry at the hardness of the heart of the Pharisees, and he was grieved, but he did not sin. And if our anger is directed against the sinful treatment of others, and if we allow it to move us toward constructive means by which to resolve the problem, it can be righteous anger. If it's something that was committed against us, it's going to be harder, you see. But if he sees something that is against other people, and it's not a matter of him being justifying himself. So you have to check yourself to make sure that you direct your righteous anger righteously. So that because there are reasons for being angry about sinful practice like child abuse and pornography and abortion and racism and mistreatment of women. That's obvious. But there are some forms of unrighteous anger where people get almost addicted to the self-righteousness that it produces, and they can get often a trip on that. But so the first thing then is he expressed righteous anger because he was concerned with with their concerns, and it was a cry that goes up to the heart of God. Secondly, he exercised self-control because it says that he consulted with himself. We got angry, but then I consulted with myself. What does that mean? Isn't that an interesting thought? He took stock. It's a wonderful text. It's very subtle, but it's there. He didn't go off in a rage to blast those who were wrong. He cooled off, thought and prayed things through. Proverbs 16:32. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. It's a very hard thing, because once you start, it's very difficult to stop. So it's an exercising of self-control, which is part of the fruit of the Spirit. So that's another component that I thought was wise. A third principle I think he followed was that biblical confrontation. There are principles that he followed. It's difficult and uncomfortable to confront people who are causing a problem. And it's especially true if they're wealthy, as these people were. They were in a position that could, in fact, become a pushback against him and his productivity as well. So there's a risk that's taken in this. But he privately confronted those who were guilty of mistreating the poor. So it was a wise principle. First, he privately confronted the people guilty of doing this. And this is, again, he followed the pattern of private confrontation before public confrontation. There's a lot of wisdom in this little text. And we don't know if he succeeded in private, probably not, but he moved then to public confrontation from there. And so he called a great assembly and rebuked the leaders in front of that assembly, and further stated that their behavior was not good and that their enemies would mock the Jews for the mistreatment of their own people. How would we look even to the other foreign nations if we were treating our own people in this way? And how does that besmirch the reputation of the God of Israel? So it really has to do with this God, the idea of who will be hurt. Remember Joseph, what did he say to Potiphar's wife? Remember, she wasn't a subtle woman. Come lie with me. Every day, come lie with me. What did he say to her?
Take sin against God.
Yes, this would be a sin against God. It would be a sin against your husband. It'd be a sin against yourself, really, and against God. But he brings it up. He thought it through because he knows it's going to happen. And that this is becoming a great a problem. So we've thought it through. So you have to ask yourself, is there anything that I'm doing that would besmirch the reputation of God? If people knew that you're a follower of Jesus, would this besmirch his reputation? That's an actually interesting angle to take, because instead of being concerned about your reputation, you should be jealous for God's glory. And in doing so, then, if you are jealous for the glory of God, if you are concerned about honoring him, because those who honor me, I will also honor, it will actually be a reciprocal process of personal purification as well. So he said that their behavior was not good and that their enemies would mock the Jews for their mistreatment of their own people. And so he speaks about this, and then this idea of this fear of confrontation, as again, especially if the person has power or wealth, that'll only ramp it up. But again, there's a personal risk involved when you're dealing with these principles. So the two that I've seen so far then is the principles of self-control, of first of all, righteous indignation, but self-control, starting it privately, then going publicly. And then a sense of godliness. He was a personal example of godliness, and that showed that leaders must be above reproach. So he said, I myself have not done this. And so there's this whole issue then of saying that his own example as governor over a 12 years period of time, where he absorbed the cost himself and did not want to oppress the people, was not just as pride, but just to say, this is who I am. And so again, you want to live in such a way that there's a seamless tunic between your character and your claims, between your words and your works. You want to make that consistent between who you claim to be and who you really are, because who you are is who you are when no one's looking. So really, to realize the true self then is to live in a sense that there is, if I'm open before God, then I can be open before others as well. I have nothing to hide. You see, that's really that kind of transparency. He laid aside his rights, and he did not take advantage of his position and power, because he could have taken the governor's food allowance. He chose not to do it, apparently out of his own pocket. And it's very much like Christ, who laid aside his rights and to take on the form of a servant. And he feared God and cared about hurting people. So there was a very clear thing. In 15, the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from them bread and wine besides 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants domineered the people. I did not do so because of the fear of God. So there was a sense of the fear of God, not just that, but also because it would be wrong to you. So I don't want to hurt the people. So I don't want to be injurious. So verse 18 goes on to add then that now, he talks about what was prepared. For all this I did not demand the governor's food allowance, because the servitude was heavy on this people. So he feared God, and he was also concerned about the weight it was putting on them, already being oppressed. So he's dealing with the situation. I like the fact that it stops right in the middle here. There's a great advance, and then all of a sudden this pushback from the interior problems that they were having. So really there are structural evils. He was also generous to share, and to me, a leader needs to be an example of generosity, so that you have more effectiveness when there's an integrity. Remember, between what integrity is, the congruence between what your ethics are, which is your defined standard of behavior, and your morality, which is your lived standard of behavior. So we all have a defined standard, we have a lived standard, and the issue of how much do they overlap? What I claim and how I live, that's your integrity. And the ideal would be that the two would be perfectly overlapping. That never happens, I think, in this life, but the desire would be to become more and more congruent. And when the Spirit points out, this is the interesting thing, I think it gets, as you grow spiritually, the lessons get more subtle. And they become less and less sins of the flesh and more sins of the Spirit, which are far more subtle indeed. And so then dealing with little matters of pride, matters of resentment, matters of unforgiveness, and things of this nature. So it seems to me that we're in a learning process, ever going under the tutelage of the Spirit of God. And as we hear his voice, and this is one of the keys that you want to do, is to consult yourself and consult your God, consult the Spirit, and to invite the Spirit to give you a sense, what's the appropriate approach? Because each is a case-specific, situation-specific situation. Each requires its own, there are principles you can apply. But wisdom takes those principles and applies them at the right amount, for the right reasons, in the right time. And does that then in the sense of understanding that wisdom applies the principles and moves us from theory to action, and is perfectly conformed to the needs of the situation. So you need the guidance of the Spirit and a growing prudence and wisdom. The more you learn, then, what's going to happen once you gain a lesson? And remember the iceberg, some of the stuff that goes from that is now dealt with, it now rises to the surface, because when some is removed, that exact amount of mass will rise to the surface. Now you have new things to learn, new mistakes to make you couldn't have made before. You weren't ready because you kept on making the same stupid mistakes. Wisdom is the art of staying off dead-end streets. It's the art of learning quickly rather than making the same mistake again and again. And we've talked about this before. Again, the Will Rogers deal. Good judgment comes from experience, and most of that comes from bad judgments. But the fact is, all right, let's not repeat the same year 40 times in a row, but rather let's gain from this. So it seems to me that once the Spirit's trying to prompt you to learn a thing, the sooner you learn it, the better off you'll be. Then he'll be able to teach you new stuff. But why would he give you more light if you didn't respond to the light he gave you? He's the perfect pedagogue. And he gives you light, and then you don't respond, he'll get your attention in all sorts of ways. Again, remember that idea that he gets our attention. God speaks to us through our, through our conscience, but he gives us, it's the pains of life that really get our attention. He shouts to us in our pains. But the idea here is, wouldn't it be wise to learn it fast? And then repent of that, which means change your direction. You got that lesson? Now I can teach you more. But it'll never stop. And the minute you stop learning, you start dying. Because you want to continue to grow and mature. Even when I was just talking with a friend about retirement, and the stages of retirement are interesting because Dr. Riley Moynes describes phase 1 as vacation, about a year. And then phase 2, loss and lost. Loss of the big 5, routine, identity, relationships, purpose, and power. And the 3 Ds often take place: divorce, depression, decline. That produces a modality of fear and anxiety and depression. It's a process. It's like grief. They go through various stages. Then the third phase is trial and error. How can I make my life meaningful again? What can I contribute? I've got to experiment with new activities. Most people never get to stage 4. Phase 4 is this: rethink and rewire. Understand you're called to serve other people. You're called to be a sage and to give away that hard-earned wisdom that you've learned through pain and adversity and sorrow and suffering and setbacks. And you're called to steward that and give it to other people. So when you begin to realize that, and that's really what recalibrate your life is like, not just for retirement, but at any time, to kind of recalibrate, review. And in fact, the last 2 weeks, I hope you were doing that a little bit when you had a little extra time, because it's my custom, and I hope it's yours as well, to back off and to just get a revision. So that's why I think recalibrate your life is a good exercise for us to do on a regular basis. But I think that what we have to do is to realize we can squeeze all the juice out of retirement. It's not a lifestyle. It's now an opportunity to take that hard-earned wisdom and skill and to train it and to teach other people so that they become apprentices in kingdom living. So that's really a responsibility we've been given. And you have so much. And whether you're retired or not, we're all called to give away what we've been received. The more you give away, the more it's really yours. And the more you do that, the more the relationships then give you a sense of satisfaction. And you realize your life journey had a purpose. And you went through a lot of this. You went through this problem because it gave you wisdom to help a person with a similar problem. You went through this problem because then you can help another person in a similar situation. So begin to realize nothing's accidental, but it's what you do with what you received. So to me, there's wisdom in gaining understanding that you always have a purpose. But retirement is not a lifestyle where you now says, I deserve a break today. You see. No, actually, that's the time when you need to really go for broke, because this is a marathon, and you don't just take a nap on the 26-mile point. There's another half a mile. Why is it people bench themselves along the way? And they become benched believers. They watch the game from the sides, but they're not in it anymore. And you want to be in the game. And there's no more than one step away from being back in the game. And then deciding and praying and asking the Spirit to show you who are the people in my life, in my network, that I could assist, that I could mentor, that I could help them grow. And there's a prayerful process of becoming the kind of person that people would want you to guide them. So it's always a kind of reciprocal relationship. But to me, that's the stewardship you've been entrusted with. So you want to see that you're called, when you reach a certain point in life, to be a sage. And wherever we are in our journey, as you know, the principles of being an apprentice first, then a journeyman, and then the master. So the whole idea is that the next person becomes a master who then does it again and replicates the process. It's sad how much knowledge, by the way, has been lost with the loss of the apprenticeship system. Stained glass windows, things of this sort, certain techniques that if not imparted from generation to generation will fade away, and we lose that technology. It's amazing how that works. So you want to take that wisdom you've got and to build it and give it to other people, whether they're people in your family or whether they're people that have worked with you or are working with you now. Think about that. And so what you're doing is you're investing in others what God's invested in you. And now there's a flow, isn't there? Because instead of the sit, soak, and sour mindset, because after a while you begin to smell. You have to squeeze out the sponge and then get more. You see, respiration. So if you just sit, soak, and always taking it in, not giving it out, something's wrong with that. Now you need to give out. So that's why, by the way, the church gathered is for edification, to receive, to build up each other up in the faith. The church scattered is for evangelism, for you to mix it up in the marketplace, and for you to be using that as an arena of impact and influence. So it seems to me that you are called to be God's man for where you've been planted, and do it well, do it with excellence. Use the skills that have been honed, and train and teach others to do and go beyond yourself even. And so invest in those people's lives, and you'll never regret it. So that to me is a very key thing. So being committed to God's purposes, being jealous for his reputation, so that you do not besmirch his reputation, that my life would not bring shame on the name of Christ, you see. So you want to live in such a way that you have a positive desire, a positive good that you're pursuing. And another thing that comes down to this matter of leadership, and I see it again and again in these texts, is pursue what you want rather than what you're trying to avoid. So, how many people spend so much of their time trying to avert or avoid what they don't want? I think most people are trying to have strategies of avoidance or just, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do. So they're focusing on what they don't want to do rather than what they do want. So this is why I find that the principle of extinction will never work. If I try to get rid of a thing by trying to get rid of a thing, I'll just be thinking about the thing. Don't think about a pink elephant. You'll be thinking about the replacement. The expulsive power of a new affection is always the way. Give a better good that you pursue. So you want to have a better vision, a better desire for what is you're called to be doing. So in the lives of other people, then for example, I was hearing this. A friend of mine wanted to carry me to see this crazy English show about this guy who's he's both a restaurateur. He's a great chef, but he's forced because he's a chief inspector. That this is a pie in the sky, yeah. And so he's forced because they're holding his retirement over him. So he's forced to solve crimes, but he really wants to be in his restaurant all the time. And it's a very clever thing, and it was very well done. I would actually recommend it. Charming, but at the same time, it has the most awful theme song. And once when Karen and I saw that, and I said, I've got this thing running through my head. What am I going to do getting rid of this horrible thing? What I did, I put in a great piece of music. I put in something so wonderful that's what because I was getting close to going to bed. I didn't want to be thinking about that horrible. Yeah. So I replaced it with a better song, and indeed it works. So whatever you pursue, what you do want, not what you don't want. And the wisdom of that then is to give you, you're impelled by desire, by aspiration. And this is why Jesus asked that question. And you know I'm going to ask that throughout the course of the day, as I'm hoping you are too. What do you seek? The second question, who do you say I am? The third question, do you love me more than these? Those three questions. So just by asking that, what am I seeking right now? What am I seeking in my talk with Raymond when we were together? Or what am I seeking in doing this thing over here? So what do I seek right now more than anything else in this operation? Is it to seek your pleasure and to seek to serve other people? Because you see, when I become other-centered, I discover that I never find fulfillment and satisfaction by trying to find them. But rather, fulfillment, satisfaction are the byproduct, the overflow of the pursuit of the one thing most needful. They are the pursuing him above all else. Then you discover, oh, he's going to throw in satisfaction as an end. You see, you're never going to get love, joy, and peace by trying to get love, joy, and peace. You're going to get them only when you pursue the one who is the source of those. And then this is why I say, far better to fix your eyes on Jesus than to avoid sin. You see, sin avoidance strategies are stupid. It's the gospel of sin management. But rather, what you should do is seek to fix your eyes on Jesus, because when my eyes are on him, that takes care of the other problem. So pursue what you want rather than to avoid what you don't want. And there's a wisdom in that. And by just training people, and how did you learn these skills, these things in your industry? How did you learn to do this? How were you able to accomplish this or that? So you begin to then take that, and it's almost like reliving your life through the person and in that person. But you see you're serving that person, and you become part of their life journey. And how can you quantify your impact on another human being? There's no metric by which you can quantify your impact on another person. Ripple effects that can't be quantified. And in fact, how many lives do you think you may have touched who, because you touched them, have touched others? And then from them to another, on it goes. Indeed, are you not the product of hundreds of people who prayed for you? People who have come before you, people who prayed for you. And those people were people who prayed for them. And those people were people who prayed for them all the way back to the first centuries. You see where I'm going with that? So that the idea that there's a succession, a lineage, a legacy that transcends DNA. Because you see, your legacy is going to be the lives that God has graced you to touch and to heal and to serve in this brief ephemeral time on this world.